You know, as I stroll down here looking at the Wall of Fame, I think about all these people, so many of which I've known.
Radio, TV, and podcasting wag Mike Gelfand visits the Pavek Museum and Broadcasting Hall of Fame.
Can I get your autograph?
Well, of course.
But first, Tim O'Brien meets up with DFL lawmakers Laurie Halvorsen and Steve Cwodzinski. This is Democratic Visions.
Welcome to Democratic Visions. We have two guests today. Steve Cwodzinski, who is a state senator from Senate District 48, which is most of Eden Prairie and South Minnetonka, and Laurie Halvorsen. Laurie is the House representative from 51B, which I believe is a city of Eagan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So welcome both of you to the program. I'm looking at this as sort of a recap of the legislative session. And you can tell me the hits and the misses, however you want to describe it. But I would like to tell our viewers that each of these two individuals knocked off Republican incumbents. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that has kept the House in DFL control. And if the Senate can turn over, 2 seats, we can put the Senate into Democratic control.
I think 3. I think
it's
really
2
close.
Or
3.
It's really close.
It's 35 to 32.
Yeah. So I looked at Steve's website, and you sort of recapped the last session of the legislature as a effort that showed that compromise was possible. There were some good accomplishments that came out of it. You pointed out that Minnesota Care was preserved and is no longer got a sunset provision, which is great. You also pointed out that education funding was increased by 2% per annum, which is another great accomplishment. Laurie, for your part, you are chair of the Commerce Committee, is that correct?
That's correct.
And I think I looked up that you had at least 21 hearings of that committee during this last legislative session.
Yeah, there was a lot of work to do in the Commerce Committee. We have a very large purview of oversight, and so we heard a lot of bills.
So I've got some specific issues here, and this is not going to be like a CNN debate. I'm not going to thumbs up or thumbs down, but I would like to get your take on some issues. Let's start with guns. Is that an issue in 51B?
It's absolutely an issue. I think it's an issue statewide. It's something that everybody seems to be talking about. I think the conversation has changed a lot over the years as we've seen some of these tragedies play out in our communities. And it's become very clear that public policy could make a real difference and prevent some of the tragedies that we've seen. And the House of Representatives this year did pass 2 bills that are some of the most popular bills when it comes to preventing gun violence. We passed universal background checks. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to purchase a gun, no matter who you purchase it from, you're going to go through the same background check.
For my father-in-law, I've got to go through a background check. And that's
family-to-family transfers are treated differently, and they are exempted.
I see.
And inheritance is treated differently. But for the most part, if you are going to have a financial transaction, you are going to go through the same types of background checks.
And that extends to gun shows then, too?
That extends to gun shows and the internet, yes.
Okay. What was the other?
The other bill is the red flag bill, and this is a bill that has passed around the country in the wake of tragedies like in Florida, and the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas actually came to Minnesota and visited our state capitol. Mm-hmm. And this red flags bills have passed in red states and blue states, so it's not a partisan issue. It really is a public safety issue, and we've had situations where families have been concerned about a loved one, or an individual has been concerned about their own mental health, particularly when you look at rates of suicide. Guns really are a huge factor when it comes to suicide. And so individuals, family members, law enforcement would have the ability to petition the courts and go through a due process system to decide if an individual needs to have their firearms removed temporarily. We've seen some headlines from around the country where red flag laws have been used recently. It's a law that's really worked.
And Steve, when you're out talking to people, what do you hear on the gun issue?
It runs the gamut, but I do have to apologize to my colleague across the hallway. The Senate didn't hear either of those 2 bills, and I think the Washington Post just came out with a poll on both those questions, and over 80% of Americans want red flag laws and background checks, and so it's inevitable. And the kids are screaming; they're looking at us adults, and yelling at us, why haven't you guys figured this out? So it's inevitable. I think the Senate will get their act together, maybe not this session, but certainly in 2021, and we'll pass those two things Laurie just alluded to.
Isn't it true, though, that support for guns is sort of an important part of the present-day identity of the Republican Party? And if we are going to get it accomplished in Minnesota, doesn't the Senate have to switch to Democratic control?
Most likely, yes. But it's just, they always just rally around the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia. The word regulate is in the Second Amendment.
But I'm a zealot. I don't interpret it in that fashion, right?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to judge you or anybody, but
I'm just stating the what apparently is the obvious argument.
I think in the suburbs, which both of us represent, there's going to be a groundswell of people with opinions like Laurie just eloquently expressed.
And two more items relative to guns. What do you think about banning bulletproof vests? Do you think that that's something that should be done?
Banning bulletproof vests?
Yes, banning the sale of bulletproof vests. Some of these assaults, these mass killings that people have been wearing bulletproof vests, and here I am, shoot me anyway, what do I care?
So I think that when we look at any public policy that's related to gun violence, we're really looking at what's the science around that, what really makes a difference in changing the outcomes of gun violence, and how do we stop this growth of gun violence in our country. And so I'm not familiar with what the studies show on that, and that's why I think in the House we have focused so much on red flag and universal background checks, because the studies really show that
what
it
about
makes
a ban on
difference.
assault weapons and the ammunition? Do you think that has a future in the legislature?
I think that regulating things like bump stocks, making sure that people can't stockpile dangerous ammunition is something that people will continue to talk about. We've had bills introduced. They haven't moved as fast and don't have the same kind of popularity that red flag laws and universal background check laws have. But we have to think about gun violence in a very holistic way.
Have you thought through a position on that,
Well,
Steve?
I've not heard about the bulletproof vests until now, but schools are starting to or market bulletproof backpacks, and I didn't think I'd ever live to see such a concept.
Well, I was at the state fair and I read the results of the poll, and over 89% of the people that responded, obviously an unscientific poll, but they did want the criminal background checks implemented in the state of Minnesota.
A lot of people showed up to make their voices heard in that poll, and I think that it reflects how the conversation have changed and who's having the conversation. I, like you, have had people stop me in the grocery store and say, I'm a hunter. Guns have always been important in my life. We need to pass these good public policies that are going to keep people safe. And so the conversation has changed. And then the influx of students making their voices heard, showing up at the Capitol. I'll tell you, as a policymaker, nothing makes you stand up more, I think, than having to listen to the people that you're handing the future over to. And it's really been inspiring, and they've changed the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So let's, I'm going to do an about face now, and I want to talk about a major issue in my mind, which is climate change. And the legislature attempted to address it. Governor Walz promoted, and the House passed a bill that would require all electricity to be produced, be carbon-free by 2050. I guess that's 31 years out. Did you back that bill? Does you think that makes sense? Is it economically possible?
I think it's economically possible, and I think we have to. I mean, it's the future of the planet. And again, you alluded to the kids. The kids are pushing all this. It's wonderful to see. It's like reminds me of the 60s when so much of the political movement was coming from our youth. And I had an intern working for me this last session, and there was a downtime. And I asked her to do some research on the plight of the Minnesota animals, the butterfly, the tree, the Norway pine, and the monarch butterflies, and the pink lady slippers, because they can't adapt to climate change. So are we going to, 50, 100 years from now, have to rechange all these icons of Minnesota?
Well, good luck. I mean, you have the Senate refusing to consider any kind of establishment of that kind of policy. I got another topic that I want to briefly swing to, and that's transportation. Now, Steve, you're at the You're at the far end of the Southwest Light Rail. That's going great guns, but financing for further transportation improvement and roads and bridges took a U-turn the wrong direction during the session. House again passed a bill which included, I guess, a ½ cent increase in regional sales tax and 20 cents a gallon on gas. Were you a proponent of that measure?
I did vote in favor of the bill, and I think it's important when we talk about an increase in the gas tax that we talk about it in terms of the way it will roll out. So it's not 20 cents tomorrow.
Phased in.
It is phased in over time, and it is the most predictable source of revenue for the state. That money can't be diverted. It's constitutionally dedicated. And so when our citizens say we want money to go to roads and bridges, that is the best bet for the citizens to know exactly where their money is going. When it comes to transit, what's very clear, and employers in suburbs like mine are saying we can't get people into our community to work. The population of Eagan grows during the day with workers coming from around the region, and when people can't get to my community to work, when there isn't transit options available, we don't have workers to do the jobs that are sitting
I would have
open.
thought Eagan was
Right, I'm
people would
surprised.
be moving to other areas to work, but it's a net importer of.
We grow during the day. We are not a bedroom community,
That's
so
really
we are a
good.
large employer in the state, and so transit is the conversation is changing because it's become a serious workforce issue. It's having a huge impact on our employers in Minnesota, and so it's the responsible thing for us to do.
And Steve, is the light rail? I mean, is that? It's just a matter of time now. The construction is underway.
The federal government hasn't paid their share, but they've assured us it's in like the top drawer somewhere.
Yeah, right.
But it's a goal. And again, it's the third time we've mentioned our young people. Young people, that's how they want to get to work. And I think we're going to have these little pocket communities. It's an economic boom to the Southwest Metro and largest public works project in Minnesota history. And so I'm proud of it.
Tell me, Laurie, what was the favorite measure that you worked on during this last legislative session?
Well, it's hard to pick a favorite. Was very proud to be the chief author of the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. It's a bill that would create a fund for employers to be able to offer paid family and medical leave to their employees, so that people could get partial wage reimbursement if they take time off to have a baby or care for a loved one or take care of their own illnesses. The need is incredibly great. Minnesotans leave almost $500,000 of wages on the table when they have to take unpaid leave, and that has a huge impact on our economy. It has a huge impact on the security of our families, and it's just something that we need in this state and around the country.
You got it through the House, but stonewalled at the state Senate level?
It was. I'm sorry for that theme. The House is under DFL control currently,
Right.
and we did work real hard and have a lot of hearings, and I'm sorry that my colleague didn't get to be part of those.
And what about you, Steve? What measures did you take the most interest in?
You know,
or work
the
on?
one I've been arguing on behalf for my entire 3 years in the Senate is requiring American government in high school. It's not required right
Right.
now, and I've been working on that pretty hard. And I finally made it through committee this year, and it passed the House and the Senate, but it's not required, it's encouraged. So I got baby steps, right?
Congrats.
So hopefully this next session, we can move from that to required, from encouraged to required.
But let me just ask you a little broader question in that context. When you envision, and I know you're running for re-election, at least I hope you're going to run for re-election, do you run with the hope that, I mean, obviously the hope, but do you run with the expectation that you'll be in a Democratically controlled Senate?
Every politician wants to be in the majority party. Just listening to Laurie before the show began, I found out how great. I've never known what it's like to work in the majority. So I'd like to have that experience once in my career so I can compare and contrast the two roles as a minority and as a majority party representative.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to switch another topic, marijuana. Again, your non-scientific poll at the State Fair showed that maybe 56% of the individuals thought that it was a good idea to legalize adult use of recreational marijuana. Are you in favor of that?
I have not gone into the completely in favor category, and I will say, as chair of the Commerce Committee, there are many regulatory issues that fall under my purview that I have a lot of concerns about. Number one is banking. It is a cash-only business. That money legally can't be banked because it's illegal at the federal level. And so the issues
How about Bitcoin?
that it creates in our banking industry is problematic. We'll set that one aside. Additionally, we have some real health issues that we need to discuss. We're seeing the spike in vaping, and we know that THC is an item that's being used in vaping. Currently, kids are getting the message that marijuana is less harmful, harmless, and that's a concerning message because early science that's out there is really showing an impact on the developing brain when it comes to using marijuana. So we have to have smart policy if we're going to roll this out for adult recreational use. We have to have smart policy in place that keeps it out of the hands of kids. We haven't been successful when it comes to tobacco, and we certainly haven't been successful when it comes to vaping. So we have to go in with our eyes wide open and know how we're going to fight that battle. Or alcohol. But much more to tobacco industry has been much more successful in getting their products into our kids' hands.
What about you, Steve?
About 6 months ago, I was wavering
Yeah.
whenever I was asked, and I think I finally came on board with the 56%. And I think for me, the push over the ledge, so to speak, was I want it regulated. People are buying marijuana and they don't even know what the THC level is. And if the government took on the role of regulating it, I think the kids and the adults, not the kids, we want to keep it out of the hands of the kids, but the people that purchase it will know the quantity and quality that they're getting.
And it would be an uncertain but a real source of income on a tax level, would it not?
We don't know what the expenditures will be,
Well,
so you
you
can't
just
look at it as
alluded to that somewhat,
you can't
yes.
look at it as just a net gain for the state because we have issues around public safety. We don't know what safe levels for driving are, and we can't test for it. We have issues around drug use and abuse and costs that has to our society. We see that with other legal drugs like alcohol, and so you can't look at it as a net gain. We really have to go in eyes wide open.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Issue of the day, insulin, emergency. People are rationing insulin. People are dying from the rationing. It came within an eyelash of passing the legislature. Depending upon who you talk to, apparently there was some sort of error in the transmittal of the bill that stopped it from getting through. You can believe that or not, and I don't. But are you in favor of calling a special session to deal with the insulin crisis?
Absolutely. So I actually was in the room where it happened, as they say in Hamilton. I was part of that negotiating team on insulin, and it was not an error. It was a very deliberate, unfortunately, omission of that bill. We have people in Minnesota who have died from rationing insulin, and it's unconscionable when you see an increase in the price of a vial of insulin that has not changed since 1996. But the price has gone up 1,200%.
Unbelievable.
Think about anything you purchase in your life,
Yeah.
and if you could afford a 1,200% increase, and now think about that you need it to stay alive. It's sort of like charging for oxygen.
Well, and the fact is that this isn't anything where these pharmaceutical companies spent gazillion dollars developing. Was handed to them by the government, as I understand it. It
was developed at the University of Toronto, and it was sold. The patent was sold for $3 by its developers because prior to its development in the 1920s, if you had diabetes, you died. I have type 1 diabetes, and so I'm grateful every day for that discovery. But I also know far too many people who are struggling to be able to afford to eat and take insulin, or put a roof over their head and take insulin. That's just wrong in this country.
We're down to our last minute here. Tell me, what are you looking forward to in the next legislative session, Steve?
Trying to get more teachers involved in the political process. I think our youth and our educational system could be so greatly improved, and I want those kids to start even getting more involved. And so I'm going to work hard on trying to get.
I bet you had a bunch of interns working for you from high school.
I've loved it. It's
Yeah.
been wonderful. So education and our teachers and our schools.
Okay, Laurie, what about you?
No greater effort. Well, I am working currently to put together a bill to deal with the vaping issue in Minnesota, respond to the deaths that we've had. So that's something that's on my radar right now. I am also working with a group of advocates to make sure that we get this insulin bill passed. If we don't get a special session, that is one of the first things we deal with when we come back into session. The health of Minnesotans is incredibly important.
Well, I think this is what's called a wrap, but this is your first time, I think, on Democratic Vision. It's nice to meet you, Laurie.
to meet
and
you.
Steve's
Yeah.
been here before.
Yeah,
Good
I
to see you
have. I
again.
enjoy it. Thanks, Tim.
Laurie, Steve, and Tim continue their discussion online at the Democratic Visions channel on YouTube.
In September, Southwest Community Television and Bloomington Community Access Television regulars visited the Pavek Museum of Broadcasting in St. Louis Park. Our guide was Danny Henry, the Pavek's Director of Collections and Media Services.
And again, so now we've got 3 tuning dials. There
The
we are.
Pavek boasts the nation's most complete exhibit of communication technology, from early telegraphing to radio and television, and all the different recording formats to the cell phones of the digital age.
Of our heritage. Here in Minnesota, we're very proud of our heritage and our history, and a remarkable.
Our group had plenty of questions, and Danny delivered with flair.
This is the first record changer for you. 1927, $600. And there's an electric record cutter right there, and it would just capture the information and write it to the disc. And as we mentioned, so that's
Retired KQ morning show contrarian Mike Gelfand was with us.
You know, those original TVs were so small they had to have little people reading the evening news.
I like Mike's vinegary take on professional sports, stand-up comedy,
Radio Sunday
and the
night.
media.
And yet, how much have things changed?
Mike and I have co-produced shows through Southwest Community TV, both in his backyard and here in the BCAT studio.
Remember the cable TV scramble back in the day?
Now, Stretch has famous issues with elder sports scribe Sid Hartman, who still writes for the Star Tribune and is heard on WCCO AM radio.
Wasn't the prototype of that recording of Sid Hartman's Briss?
that's correct.
That's what I've
Yes,
heard, yeah.
1920.
He appreciated the Pavek's tech exhibits, but Mike's interest was in another exhibit, one that recognizes many of his broadcasting brothers and sisters.
You know, as I stroll down here looking at the Wall of Fame, I think about all these people, so many of which I've known. The memories.
Years ago, on Friday nights, I used to go up to the 3rd floor of Harry's, which is my all-time favorite restaurant and bar. It was over on 11th.
I looked over some of those old bedtime news things. It was 16 years ago, and it was disheartening to see that they're not funny. God knows why they were then. I think
You know, to people under 70 or so, some of these names may not mean much, but they mean a lot to me.
You betcha, Raymond, my boy. I was once voted honorary bartender of the month, you know.
Halsey Hall. Halsey Hall was probably the first of the dual threats. He could do radio, television. He wrote for newspapers, and he was the Twins' color guy back in the 70s. In fact, he was alive the first year that I actually covered the Twins for the Minneapolis Tribune. And every day I'd have breakfast, and Halsey would say, "How you doing, old boy?" Never learned my name. Just called me boy or kid or coach or something. But he loved me.
And let's find out what's going on with Joyce Lamont. Good morning, Joyce.
Good morning, Paul. Let's start with the dog show. And this is a big one. It's the Minneapolis Kennel Club show. All breeds.
And Joyce Lamont, everybody remembers, well, not everybody, but people my age and over remember Joyce Lamont. Joyce Lamont was the produce woman on WCCO radio. Yes, they had a produce woman. She read you a list of the produce on sale at supermarkets. For example, she would say, and this is probably my favorite Joyce Lamont moment, she would say, "And peaches are in plentiful supply." That was Joyce Lamont. And from her, I learned how to imitate an elderly woman. Now, if I could only date an elderly woman. Oh, look, there's Nancy Nelson. I always wonder if the woman I knew as the waifish queen of Bolorama was the fiery liberal I know today and love so much.
Even within our own party, we haven't done the job of putting it together, putting it out there.
Stretch, is that you?
Oh,
Mike!
Oh, yes, it is. Yes.
Oh my gosh, can I get your autograph?
Grudgingly, I guess. Normally I charge $1.25, but you seem like a nice guy.
Thank you.
How would you like me to sign it? The real king of radio?
That article was in '84 because I remember you put in the article that my voice appeared on the 1984 Olympics more than any athlete
Yes,
did.
that's right. That's right.
Wow, it was unbelievable.
You must have done pretty well at that spot.
I would have done better except for
Tom Bernard was my sidekick. What do you think of that one, huh?
network TV spots for McDonald's for the 1984
And
Olympics.
what's your name?
Dietrich.
Dietrich. That's D-I-E?
I-E.
Okay,
T-R-I-C-H.
T-R-I-C-H. H is in humble.
Yeah.
Humble, okay. I can do that. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jim.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Stretch.
And then there's Sid, Sid Hartman. Let's just say that we had a somewhat antagonistic relationship, but deep down there was pure spite and enmity and perhaps loathing. And he'd say, "Gelfand, you son of a bitch, you went too far this time." Excuse
Yes.
me.
Did you have a question about the Hall of Fame?
I'm just wondering what a broadcasting giant would have to do to become a part of this.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, you need to be nominated.
What?
You need to be nominated to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, sure. You put up
And
all
then
these
there's
huge
a committee that
roadblocks.
votes on
Sure.
that. And
Sure. You see a lot of giants of the industry here.
Sure.
But then I notice there's an omission or two.
What do you think?
What if we just sort of expedited the process?
Well,
What do you think?
let's talk
Might help?
this over.
That might help, huh? I mean,
What
you
do
look
have
like
in-
a
what do
pretty
you have- what do you have
reasonable
in
guy.
mind? Yeah, what do you have in mind?
Well, I mean, I brought this picture.
Okay.
It's pretty nice, huh?
That looks to be about the right size.
Yeah, well, right. And I was thinking maybe we could just, just say, let's just say we did a quick swap here. Maybe right here. What do you think? Huh? Huh?
I think we might have to take a vote on that too.
We'll
get the committee together.
Who would have to vote? Sid, here's an interesting fact. Sid, a lot of people don't know this, used to babysit Warren Harding.
Wow. I did not know.
That's right.
that.
Yep, it's true.
Maybe we can etch that on his plaque.
Almost everybody here has a special place in my heart. But the guy I'm thinking of is Mel Jass. People of a certain age remember Mel Jass. He was the host of some noontime movie show, I don't remember.
Best interview we've had in a long, long time. Burt Reynolds, Dan August.
But I did a story on Mel Jass for the Old Minneapolis Tribune. And he called me up the day after it ran, and he invited me to lunch. And I thought, why not? Obviously, he's appreciative of what I wrote. But actually, when we sat down to eat, he broke his dinner roll, took a sip from a non-carbonated beverage, and said, "Mike, I thought we'd get together today because of the despicable story you wrote about me." And then he attempted to get me to give my life over to the particular deity whom he had given his life over to, and I politely refused, and I've had nothing but bad luck since.
Mike dodges darts at mgelfand@aol.com. Now, Wednesdays, Mike is on Bob Zanzavier's podcast, The BS Show. And Mike has a sports blog at The Zone Coverage. And he's also on Facebook, but then again, who isn't? And visit the Pavek Museum of Broadcasting. It's in St. Louis Park, and it's got a website, pavekmuseum.org, and you might give them a call at 952-926-8198.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Edina, Minnetonka, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.